Rock pioneer and eclecticist Todd Rundgren finally opens out about his troubled relationship with the Beatles and John Lennon while sitting in the spotlight. Although Rundgren acknowledges that the Beatles had a profound impact on the 1960s and produced music that has stood the test of time, she argues that not all aspects of their legacy are deserving of the acclaim they have received. His remarks pierce to the core, exposing Lennon's problematic behavior and relationship dynamics within the music industry, as well as his frequently disregarded shortcomings. According to Rundgren, Lennon was frequently at the eye of the storm when it came to the egos, rivalries, and dysfunction that lurked beneath the Beatles' flawless front. The early 1970s, when John Lennon's solo career blossomed after leaving the Beatles. Already famous for his daring musical style, Rundgren was never afraid to say what was on his mind. During an interview, Rundgren was asked about Lennon's solo work. She didn't mince words, calling it politically charged and excessively self-indulgent. Lennon, famous for his thin skin and sharp tongue, took offense to the remarks. The press became embroiled in a vicious word war that ensued, with Lennon responding in his trademark scathing fashion. Rundgren depicts Lennon as an egotistical, fragile man who couldn't take criticism. Although they were never friends, the public conflict between the two artists was a reflection of their divergent ideologies. Lennon frequently crossed into what Rundgren perceived as egocentric area, in contrast to Rundgren's emphasis of invention and distancing from market expectations. Lennon was a man who lived on confrontation but suffered with contemplation. Their brief conversations revealed this underlying fact. Obviously, Rundgren wasn't the only target of Lennon's animosity. His battle with Paul McCartney was probably Lennon's most well-known and publicized dispute. Once creative collaborators inseparable, the two became enemies after the Beatles broke up in 1970. According to Rundgren, this shows that even among his closest friends and family, Lennon couldn't keep the peace. Lennon was unpredictable and frequently brutal, in contrast to McCartney's meticulousness and diplomacy. While the Beatles were breaking up, Lennon wrote How Do You Sleep?, an incredibly critical piece about Paul McCartney that didn't leave much room for creativity. Dripping with Bitterness was a song that criticized McCartney for being too commercial and superficial. Rundgren sees this as an instance of petty jealousy where Lennon's fears took precedence over his abilities. An era came to a close, and an unbreakable tie began to dissolve during the rivalry between Lennon and McCartney, which was more than simply an ego battle. Aside from the musical disputes between Lennon, Rundgren continues. The singer's complicated relationship with the audience, especially during his political activism years, is another point he makes. Rundgren was one of many critics who felt that Lennon's action was full of inconsistencies, and he also felt that Lennon's legendary peace efforts came across as theatrical. I don't understand how a man who claims to believe in peace can openly criticize his former bandmates and get into heated arguments with his colleagues. Rundgren paints a picture of Lennon as an activist who flaunted his beliefs but failed to live by them. As an example, there was the now infamous bed-ins for peace, when Lennon and Yoko Ono let journalists inside their hotel room to advocate nonviolence. Despite their revolutionary nature, these events served to expose Lennon's insatiable need for fame. According to Rundgren, Lennon's already divisive image was further complicated by these pranks, which he says muddied the line between real advocacy and self-promotion. His explosive nature overshadowed John Lennon's genius and caused relationships to become strained as a result. Rundgren emphasizes Lennon's ability to argue, which went beyond just having artistic differences and included open struggles for dominance and ego. His tumultuous relationship with the equally irascible producer Phil Spector was a prime example of this. Their collaboration constantly threatened genius, but frequently teetered on the brink of anarchy. Not only was the music they made in the studio legendary, but so were the heated confrontations that characterized them. The equally unyielding character of Lennon put Spector at odds with his eccentric and autocratic personality. And what was the outcome? Extraordinarily intense and innovative sessions. Lennon's obsession with perfection contrasted with Spector's infamous tendency for unpredictability, leading to an atmosphere where tempers flew and patience wore thin. According to Rundgren, this scenario exemplifies Lennon's problem with harmonious teamwork. Imagine and the Rock and Roll album were genius works of theirs, but the poisonous residue they left behind further strained Lennon's already troubled professional relationships. Lennon's disagreements went far beyond the band's external contributors and into the core of the Beatles themselves. Rundgren elucidates the tense relationship between John Lennon and George Harrison, whose reserved personality frequently concealed pent-up animosity. Harrison liked John Lennon's skill, but he felt ignored and underappreciated by Lennon's dominating attitude. While Lennon's witty banter won over admirers, it frequently sliced through the band members. Amidst the colossal egos of Lennon and McCartney, Harrison had a hard time getting his voice heard, even if his songwriting flourished in the latter years of the Beatles. According to Rundgren, Harrison was marginalized and dissension was sown inside the band because Lennon was unconcerned with his ideas. While Harrison did finally establish himself with songs like Something and Here Comes the Sun, the wounds from Lennon's condescension persisted, and the tension reached a peak during the recording of Let It Be, when Harrison's annoyance with Lennon's domination was obvious. According to Rundgren, one consistent thread throughout Lennon's career is his refusal to let anyone else steal the show. The very relationships that inspired Lennon's genius, his relationships with Spector, Harrison, and McCartney, were frequently weakened by his urge to exert control. According to Rundgren, Lennon was the type of man who thrived on conflict and could escalate any argument into a full-scale showdown. He mirrored his inner conflicts in his relationships, which included a need for connection and an inability to control his demanding and angry temper. His challenging demeanor shone through in Lennon's relationships even when he wasn't in the studio. According to Rundgren, Lennon's tendency for conflict carried over into his personal life, where he frequently engaged in heated debates and harbored pent-up animosity towards his colleagues and collaborators. In spite of his genius, John Lennon's life is marked by broken relationships, whether it's the public fight with Paul McCartney or the secret animosity with George Harrison. Rundgren highlights the paradox of John Lennon's life. He was a musical genius who frequently drove a wedge between himself and his loved ones due to his unpredictable temperament. Despite his brilliant moments, his partnerships with Spector and Harrison show how difficult it was to work with someone who was as aggressive and innovative. According to Rundgren, the story of John Lennon's legacy serves as a warning about the dangers of letting one's ego get in the way of strong relationships and unwavering ambition. Stories of Lennon's struggles are a depressing reminder of the myth's human weaknesses, even though his music is still inspiring. The multifaceted personality of John Lennon, who could work his studio magic but frequently caused chaos in his wake, is better understood through Rundgren's eyes. John Lennon's legacy is both bright and dark, and his life is full of deep contradictions. Rundgren thinks of Lennon as someone who could win over millions with the sincerity of his music, yet drive a wedge between himself and his loved ones with his scathing criticism and inflated sense of self-importance. The way Lennon uses his songs love to tap into universal feelings, his unmatched intensity in the face of loss, hope, and rebellion frequently seeped into his private life, leaving a wake of broken relationships in his wake. There was an underlying dispute, resentment, or treachery in every work of art he produced. His talent was obvious and his magnetism was contagious, but no one could ignore his unpredictable behavior. As Rundgren sees it, Lennon is a man caught between two opposing forces: artist and dreamer who penned the enduring call to unity and peace. Imagine stood on one side. On the flip side, Anxieties portrayed a character who frequently resorted to violence towards individuals he saw as challenges or dangers. The personal and professional connections of Lennon were determined by this paradox. He could form strong ties, but when his darker desires surfaced, he was as good at breaking them. He had the charisma to illuminate any room, but his anger could put out any flames in an instant. Love and harmony were themes that ran throughout Lennon's music, but he had a hard time living up to those principles. According to Rundgren, he was a paradoxical person whose creativity was impermeable to his imperfections. He could write lyrics that resonated with people all across the globe, but he lacked the empathy to show his closest friends and family the same kindness. Although Lennon's music still motivates countless people, Rundgren's story shows how hard Lennon's unyielding character was on everyone around him. His caustic wit and craving for control made it difficult for him to work with others creatively. This often led to tense partnerships. His audacity, vision, and lack of fear made him an uneasy bandmate, but they also made him an invaluable leader to the Beatles. Rundgren argues that Lennon's strength and weakness were both reflected in his desire to always have the final say, whether in his art or his life. Despite all the praise and fortune, John Lennon was a troubled soul. Rundgren emphasizes the isolation he experienced as a result of his genius, which he defined as a lack of faith in and reliance on others. This seclusion served as both a sanctuary and a prison for Lennon. It allowed him to work freely, but also forced him to confront his inner demons. Rundgren sees the complexity of genius in Lennon's legacy. There are stunning high points and terrible low points in the story of a guy capable of bringing order out of disorder, yet who frequently caused more disorder as he went. As a dreamer who battled cynicism, a peace activist who was frequently at odds with himself, and an artist whose work brought people together despite the disintegration of his relationships, Lennon's paradoxes provide depth to his story. Lennon and the Beatles' mystique is enhanced by Rundgren's comments, which serve as a reminder that greatness is seldom achieved without sacrifice. Although Lennon's genius shaped a whole generation, it was not without cost, a sobering reminder that even the most brilliant people have their share of flaws. Ultimately, his multifaceted legacy reflects the brilliant, imperfect, and remarkable man himself.